I was going to try and turn your attention again, well, slightly in a different way that will seem new, to the difference between, in large areas, of what man seems to be made to believe, he claims to believe. Apparently, if you look at history from a horizontal angle, that he has even fought and died for, and in this peculiar way that I have tried to get you to see, not for the sake of theory, but because it creates, for those who can see it, or vice versa, that you've already got to have the ability for this to be rearranged in you for you to see it. But it is a distinct, real physical change in the nervous system. It is the reality of all the old dreams of being reborn, except, as you have found out in the context that I've been presenting it, has not been with a spiritual background, that it is, compared to that, it is a strictly physical background. But now throughout history, all of you are familiar, because it exists within you, and most of you have opened your mouth and played out this part already. But if you want to look historically, that you have had philosophers and would-be holy men, social critics, playwrights, throughout history, no matter what seemed to be their particular focal point for that play or that commentary, but in general, pointing out that something is drastically wrong, and they can even do it satirically. By that, I mean to imply it's not always a would-be spiritual prophet crying doom. It can be a playwright involved, apparently, with simply making fun. And of course, for a play or a piece of literature to work, they have to have a focal point. It has to have some characters and apparently be aimed at some particular activity in the human drama. But in general, what they are saying and what men are made to feel is that something is rotten. Something is extremely fishy, and it takes intelligent people like moi. It takes artistically driven folks like me to be able to cut through this odious fog that no one else seems to notice. And from that kind of springboard, they take off and they attack the opposite sex. They attack politics, they attack religion, they attack man's inhumanity to man, they attack their own calling. This little preface was just simply to remind you that as far back as recorded history goes, this has been going on, and it goes on in your own nervous system. Even when it seems to be fairly non-directive, at any particular time is this overall feeling that something sure is fishy. Again, I repeat, in your particular hardwired case, or in somebody else's, be they famous or unknown, it does not have to be in a overly melodramatic guise. It may not be that any particular individual that you could think of, including yourself, may not be driven to be so politically polemic as to be out on street corners handing out handbills and shaking their fists at the establishment, but it's still just this feeling of hearing things said on the news, hearing things said on the street, that something is fishy. The whole world is involved in some kind of practical joke, and either I'm not in on it, or else it's a big practical joke and nobody's in on it, or who knows what. It is my plan, as far as plans go, before I get through with these comments, to give you one of the world's, or life's, I should say, greatest ACBIs. If you remember my acronym ACBI for apparently correct but impossible. I guess for you newer people seeing this tape, I could be a little more magnanimous and say an ACBI, the acronym stands for apparently correct but improbable, if that makes you feel better. To work up to it a little bit, I'll leave that for the dramatic climax. As last week, I was mentioning in the guise of answering a question and then a task I gave to some of the people about this kind of process that I have described in several ways in the past, of giving people what they put out, of reversing the current. That is, and the kind of examples is, you seem to be the kind of personality that is completely overwhelmed by someone who will act just the slightest bit hostile. Somebody you know, your family, employers, employees, people you meet on the street, people that you have to do business with at a ticket office, at a supermarket, that if anybody looks at you and says, "Did you change the damn price tag on that thing?" you would almost admit it. Or you would almost say, "No, but here's the difference. You know, how much do I owe you?" That just apparently someone who acts in a very aggressive manner, that you just feel helpless. You feel as though there's a dance going on, and anytime someone like that speaks to me in that manner, it's as though, be you male or female, it's as though you have been grabbed by somebody the size of King Kong, at least psychologically speaking, and they grab you and they do any dance step they want to, and you just go right along, and all you can do is sweat and hope this ends very quickly so you can leave. And I pointed out to you that everyone is wired up, and I was giving it to you in that good old binary description, that everybody could be described as being wired up to either be seeking others' approval or apparently desiring to avoid other people's disapproval. And I've gone as far as taking those examples and pointing out to you that you could go, if you, a few people just got something to learn, that you could go back to those that apparently are overbearing to you, which could put you in the camp vis-a-vis them, put you in the camp as seeking to avoid their disapproval. And all you got to do is just show the slightest amount of disapproval, and you feel as though you have been run over, that you are helpless. And I point out to you that all you've got to do is do an exact imitation of them, and the whole situation is blown apart. All right, that is not theory. Anybody can find that out. Ordinary people, of course, cannot find it out. They might could read about it. They might could hear me say it, and a few ordinary people might go, "Hey, that feels right. I bet that's true." They can't ever do it. They're not supposed to do it. There's nothing wrong out in the ordinary world with you being of a type that someone else says, "Hey, you," you go, "Hey, I give up." There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with you being that sort and feel like there is something wrong in me being this sort. That's part of it. But for the few, you have got to be able to start off and at least expand your own nervous system horizons and experiences and potentials laterally. Remember the brain itself, to expand it laterally to the point line level consciousness, ordinary consciousness, that through here, the few areas of experience, that small areas in which you seem to have to maneuver your own personality, your own feelings, your own opinions, etc., from a very small scope in here, you've got to be able to expand it out into all the unused areas, all the places wherein you feel as though any opinion I may have out there would simply be a reflection of bad opinion. Anything that is not reflected in what is already in me is wrong. Out here would be the not I of my equation. This is other people's fallacious opinions. This is other people's incorrect information. So the few people, this is a very sort of thing that can give some people a first blush with the lifestyles of the rich and free. It's famous. But what I want you to try and consider tonight is the two ways in which this can be described. That what I have described to you absolutely is a fact. Anybody can go do it. Or if you're the type that seems overwhelmed by people who go, "Golly gee, gosh almighty, it's great to see you. Ooh, how you doing?" They slap you on the back and shake your hand, and they can pick your pocket. But you watching them. They can do anything to you. And your feeling is goddamn, I'll do anything if you'll quit smiling, if you'll quit shaking my hand, if you'll quit hollering, "Golly gee, it's great to see you," when I know that's not true. I know, I hate it. I can't explain it, but I know it's a sham. All you got to do is turn to them and go, "Golly gee to you times two." Ooh, and shake their hand even more and pat them even more. Of course, do it before they can do it to you next time. you have interfered on a scale that life will accept. It will not get you killed. On the contrary, the kinds of situations that I am making up, of course, are real. I couldn't make them up. So those involved find fault with the other people that I'm describing. So if nothing else, it'll get the other people off of you, because the kind of people that speak harshly, when you do it to them first and you do an imitation of them, they won't do it anymore. And those that go, golly, golly, gee, boy, I'm glad to see you, once you do that to them and you do it even better to them, they did it to you, they won't do it anymore. So that's just a side benefit. Since you don't like it, or you wouldn't even be able to spot what I'm saying, those particular examples, those people that you do it to won't ever do it again. Of course, you expand this kind of, to continue my parenthetical aside, if you expand this far enough out in the range of your ordinary acquaintances, if you find, well, I got a complaint with all my acquaintances, if you do this with all of your acquaintances, I might point out that you will be 2 or 3 bricks short of a full load of acquaintances very shortly. Because nobody will want to fool with you, and they won't know why. They won't talk about you, they won't gossip. If you do it just the way I've described it, they won't really be offended. It's just that they don't have anything else to do with you, and they don't know why. And that's what we're going into. Understand, those of you hearing this for the first time, that it absolutely works exactly like I'm saying. So now I want to show you part of how life, the basis of people feeling like something is amiss, that something is fishy in the land of Hamlet. It's how it could be described and how life explains it right now, and then another view, a view from a different time zone. All right, taking my examples that you've seen, I'm going back right now, I'm going to use fairly everyday terminology, as though we're having, that I'm leading some sort of psychological discussion, or I'm giving a psychological commentary of some type. And I point out, all right, if you're the sort that seems to be psychologically overtaken by any degree of hostility, aggression, the slightest show of disapproval, as though, as much as this is a public lecture and I have all these people listening, I cannot go into each and every situation, but all of you, being sophisticated, well-read people, all of you must understand, you must know that somewhere in the past, from your parents, if not your parents, whoever were your parents' figures, the kind of role models you had, and then the kind of peer pressure you picked up, but beginning at the kind of parental role model pressure that you had, somewhere along the line was the kinds of classic situations of you getting continual disapproval from one or other, from mater or pater. You're getting this kind of disapproval. It could be cross-gender disapproval, blah, blah, blah. It gets to the point, as a young child, that, let us say, for just one possibility, that it's a young girl, and she, of course, now she realizes that the old man, her father, wanted a boy. Classic case. But she didn't know that. All she remembers at an early age was her father continually, threw dumbbells at her and said, here, catch this. Kicked her in the face with soccer balls, and every time she'd fall down and bleed and cry, he'd go, ooh. And what's wrong with you? Are you a sissy? So it got to where every day he'd come home, and she would wait there by the door with the little flowers and her little doll that she made a new dress for her. And as soon as the father would come in, she'd hear the car, and he'd park, and he'd come up the driveway. She'd run out holding her little dolls and stuff, and he'd knock it out of her hand and say, I told you to quit playing with dolls. No son, well, no child of mine's going to be like that. So, it's, as you all know by now, there is a classic case, and of course, all of you that can identify with this kind of problem, some variation of that occurred in your background. Many of you can, right now, are already projecting back into the past of how this happened to you. So there is a very strong, there is a statistically proven, it's beyond any doubt, that there is that kind of psychological, either immediate trauma, or but most likely, in most cases, it is a long-range trauma over a period of time that the child, now the adult, but now with this kind of childish attitude within your little psyche, now, since it couldn't get approval, its main raison d'etre seems to be just God, or forces, life, please protect me from disapproval. Just let me get by life. I'm not going to get approval. My father wouldn't give me approval, therefore life won't give me approval. Men that I'm attracted to won't give me approval. But at least, if I have to become an old maid, if I have to just get me a job working alone at home, stitching up used radial tires or something, if I can just stay alone to where people will not disapprove of me. Classic case, all of you understand that. All right. Then, the kind of dynamics that I've been talking about of turning around to somebody seems to be giving you disapproval, and you turn on them and you just do an imitation. You just give them the same kind of disapproval. Maybe up the stakes a chip or two. And I'm telling you, I guarantee you, everybody try it, they just stop them, just like that. And that's it. Generally, they'll never do it again. It might take another small dose, if you want to really be technical. But in most cases, one time, and that's it. The dance between you and them is over. All right, now, why? Why does this work? Absolutely no exceptions. I just give you an absolute unconditional statement. All of you have tried it. Know it's true. That you can just, as far as you can push yourself, to think of the worst example in your life as somebody that is so overbearing that you just can't do anything with them. And to think that you're going to turn on them and do that to them, no, they'll kill me. I'm sure they got a gun in their back pocket, or they'll do something. They'll just strangle me. And you do it just immediately to them, and nothing of the kind happens. There's a moment of shock, and that's the end of it. And they don't ever do that to you again as a rule. They'll about just avoid you like, not an unkindly plague, but a plague nonetheless. So based upon psychological theories and truths, how could we describe what is taking place? All right, here would be the description. This would be, I suggest to you, since I'm in charge of making this up, here would be the best one. It life's ordinary level of consciousness right now for almost everybody in this time zone. Everybody at this level of consciousness at this part of the planet. Here would be the description. Here's what happens. The person, Mr. X, who is giving you the hostility, the very one that you turn on first thing tomorrow before he can do it, and you do it to him, and there's this shock, and you realize, those that belong here, not as a parlor game, but you realize when you do it, you see there is a shock. And Mr. X wanders off, and as a rule, that never happens again. So what happened? What occurred? Here would be the description that life has at line level consciousness right now. That Mr. X unknowingly was giving the whole world a psychological confession. Subconsciously, by his show of aggression to all those around him, which of course is not true, but if it was to you, all you see is the aggression apparently he gives to everybody else, because that is the primary area in which he and other people, other parts of life's body, are exchanging energy. That he is making an unconscious psychological confession because he is stating, unbeknownst to himself, and of course to others, except those that I have enlightened with this psychological secret. He is unbeknownst stating that, hey, based upon my past, the kind of childhood traumas that I experienced, hostility runs me like a little motor. Hostility is the driving force in my life. What he is saying, what he is unknowingly confessing, is the kind of scenario that I stated before, a variation of it, that he received from one or more of his parents or parent role models. Hostility. That no matter how he tried to seek approval from the parents, or parental role models, what he got was hostility. And that was the only thing that seemed to drive him. That when his father, whoever it was, would get hostile and make him do something, that seemed to be the only time that his father found any favor. Or he saw his father do it with other people. All the variations of this. And so the unconscious, the subconscious message or confession that Mr. X is giving out is that a little bit of hostility will make me jump through hoops, go fetch papers, sit in the corner, roll over and play dead. Since that's what works on me, here's the way the unconscious mind works in all of us. It's my feeling, it's my belief that that's what works on everybody else. And sure as hell, miracle upon miracle, the kinds of situations he seems to be drawn into, the kind of people he's attracted to as friends, sexual partners, the place where he works, he ends up with people like you. And sure enough, when things are not going good, or just at any time, all you got to do is turn to you. For one example, say, where's that report I asked for? It doesn't matter whether he asked for a report or not. You'll jump and go, what report? What? I'm sorry, I've been sick. There's no doubt about it. It works on people. He is giving an expose, an unrecognized confession of his own subconscious motivations. That hostility works on me, therefore that's what I use. That's the only tool I know, and I use it on other people. Conversely, to use my other example, those that seem to always be giving approval. And if you're wired up to find it false and it annoys you, Mrs. Z, let's say, is the one who is always saying, oh my, you look so lovely today. Hello, hello, how are you? Always smiling in the morning. Doesn't matter if there was a nuclear disaster next door to her last night. As soon as she sees somebody, it's, hey, how are you? And you feel like, I can't stand this. But you cannot deal with her any more than my other example could deal with figure X that's always overbearing and hostile. All right, Mrs. Z, all she is saying is she's again giving an unconscious, unrecognized confession that my subconscious drive is by somebody going, oh, how are you? That somebody, and we can trace it back to her childhood, no doubt, don't even make it up yourself. Okay, you can make up one. But we can trace it back to her childhood was such that whoever it was would treat her like, oh, aren't you a little doll? Aren't you daddy or mommy's little girl? You know, whatever it was, she was just helpless. All right, all right. You know, anything that they wanted, just, oh. And she was helpless. Like some people are helpless in the face of any show of aggression. So, here's the psychological truth behind my scenarios. That's what works on her. Therefore, as far as she knows, that's what works on everybody. That's her only instrument to deal with people. So then when you do my trick of doing an imitation of them, all you're doing is taking the normally unrecognized psychological, subconscious confessions that people are making. All you're doing is take the way they act, because what they're saying, without knowing it, is here is what subconsciously works on me. Here's what makes me jump through hoops and drives me. Here's what I can't deal with. And they're just giving you the key to them. And all you do is take the way they act like that to them, and sure enough, it works. That is, it stops whatever's going on between you and them. They just rendered inoperable. I should write a paper on that. No, somebody else write a paper and put your name on it, and you go to those damn psychological conventions. That, as all of you should know, is a fair psychological representation that would fly among psychologists. Especially if I spent 5 minutes and thought about it more and had some more up-to-date terminology. But that would fly like a greased bird right through a psychological convention. But that kind of stuff, as I've been indicating to you few people, and it's beginning to seep out into life already, not just from me, but it's just seeping out into life, that is a childish, it is almost a dysfunctional description. Now here, the same situation, but take my descriptions of man, the walking, moving nervous system, and all the ideas of a psychology separate from the rest of the body being non-existent, that everything that you experience, including your own private so-called thoughts, even the apparent actions of your so-called subconscious, are all as much based upon biochemical molecular activity as it is for you to put your hand on a stove. That every message that you apparently get from the outside world, through whatever sources, through people being aggressive, through thunder suddenly clapping and scaring you, that it is all going through the five senses It is having a biochemical effect on your nervous system, ending up at what seems to be your personality, that is, up at line level consciousness in the brain. Then, of course, the appropriate message is being fed back to make the body react with what we're concerned with right now in this sort of activity. It's what seems to be your consciousness, your perception of what's going on. That all of these so-called psychological descriptions are just useless. They served a purpose once, but if you're going to get any further neural development in this day and time, they are useless. They're as useless as your forefathers' religion. They're as useless as ideas of gods and anti-gods. My description, or another one. If we live long enough, perhaps I'll update this. But this is up to the time zone coming up. This is closer. That it works, that you apparently treat somebody just the way that they're trying to treat you, and it just stops the interplay between you and them. It puts them in a state of shock. Forget the psychological. That what they're doing is confessing their subconscious motivations, that which affects them subconsciously, and therefore it's the only tool they know to try to deal with other people. When other people do it to them, sure enough, they're helpless. It is the interaction on, compared to so-called psychological, on a strictly physical basis of a transfer of energies. And everything that's referred to as human emotions, such as aggression or joy. It could be, if the time was right and it served any purpose, I could come up with a whole new set of chemical formulae for each of these so-called emotions. And that what is happening when apparently somebody's being aggressive is it is a kind of biochemical flow going through that person to you. Not that much different from the, not only biochemical, you could compare it on from another viewpoint to a magnetic electrofields of just electrical energy that's flowing in a certain manner, and what you have done is reverse the current, or you have taken the biochemical formula going in this direction and you have taken a negative of it. You have reversed the formula and run it back, and all of the biochemical, all of the electrical activity, all of the energy transfer between you and that person comes to a halt. And this other so-called person, this other organism, is left with no energy to transfer with you. That what has held you and that person together, what life had put you together for, no matter how fleeting it may be daily or monthly or constantly, that what held you two together, the kind of energy is being transferred, was stopped. The person almost has no further dealings with you. Forget apparent psychological descriptions which I could give. They simply, without knowing it, are now rendered superfluous in particular energy transfers between you and them, that it seems to, they don't know why it's out of their hands. They didn't initiate it to begin with. They didn't understand it. But the organism itself does have a kind of crude knowledge that there's nothing further to do here. It's like someone who all their life had been eating Hershey bar with almonds. It's like one day, just their whole system just silently said, no, never again. Yeah. And never again. It was the end of them and Hershey bars and almonds. It was the end between them and you. Let me get into what I was going to say as one of the ultimate acmes of that which life has put through man as being a truism, and it's apparently correct, but it's impossible. Now, this idea has been around a long time, but I'm going to use a right up-to-date version of it. That is, you are what you eat. On the surface, even with some serious thought to the matter, that seems to be undeniably true, not only physically, but allegorically, psychologically. And it could not be further from the truth. On the contrary, what it should be is what we eat are us. or to make it a little more linguistically palatable, what we eat becomes us. We don't become what we eat. And the truth is right in front of everybody. But this is one of the major ones, because if it were true that we are what we eat, then everything that life has made man say that he believes in all the realms uniquely humane, the arts, religions, psychology, philosophy, then everything that man says is true would be so. Everything. The words I use, we are what we eat, I assume many of you know, has been rather popular, I guess, from the 60s in the subculture and coming out of the health food, fattest, and even used nowadays. You know, you should watch what you eat, not put poisons in your body. You can't be spiritual if you drink beer and alcohol and smoke cigarettes and eat things with eggs or milk. But I assume that you also, surely at least on your own, have taken that at least one step further to a psychological level. I can't name names, but there's surely some decent gurus and people around nowadays that have taken that into the psychological realm. If not, I can stand here and do it as fast as I can talk. We are what we eat. And you've got to watch what you eat. You cannot go around dealing with hostile emotions. You can't go around dealing in prejudice with people. You can't eat that kind of food, because then you become that kind of food. That is nothing new, I hate to tell you. The priests and the rabbis and everyone, philosophers. But the world of religion has always been full of that. They're so-called holy books. They can narrow it down to, you are what you eat. You can't go out in life and eat crude carnal knowledge and experiences. You can't go around fucking everybody you want to. No. Our book says you can't. You'll become, I don't know what in this case. In fact, I don't want to think about it. No, you can't go around drinking all the time. You'll become an alcoholic, see? You become what you consume. You can't go around dealing in prejudice against people, against other religions and races. You can't eat and consume hate, because you become consumed by it. You'll become a walking hate machine. All right. It's simply not true. And all you got to do is look around. All right, go home, get in a closet, and look around. Let's start at the crudest level. I got some letters from some of the people out of town and some notes. If you recall, several weeks ago, I started fooling around the edges of this. And I even went so far as to point out or suggest to you that you consider some of what I was saying 2 or 3 weeks ago about why diets do not work. And I had several responses and inquiries from some of the newer people that saw these tapes from out of town that, that can't be true. If it was true, then why do I say that you can't pursue this, for instance, and stay involved with recreational drugs or a constant consumption of alcohol, if it doesn't matter? But we're talking about two different things. We're talking about people doing this, and we're talking about life in general. We're talking about the ordinary people. But you're an ordinary person at line level consciousness. Here's what you should observe. Not all of you, because some of you don't understand the basis of it yet. But you're going to come to a state shortly that you will. That in general, once you reach a certain point, it doesn't matter what you intake. That's not a license to steal and stay drunk and stay stoned, by no means. But you just simply realize that what I have taken into my body throughout my life and even right now has no particular effect. Then you reach a certain point, and you can be exposed to almost any kind of ordinary insanity, hostility, aggression. You hear it, you see it like everybody else. You don't digest it. What you intake from the physical level, if you want to look at it on that kind of spectrum, from the physical level, that is food, all the way up to these higher foodstuffs of beliefs, thoughts, theories, human emotion, you do not become what you eat. You do not become what you eat on a physical level. Let's go back to that for a minute. You don't even find any serious opposition to this right now in life's body from, say, the medical profession. It's right now generally accepted. Not that the medical profession as a whole uses that as a rallying cry for anything, but people say you are what you eat. Nowadays it's, yeah, you're right. And you're not. It's not right. You do not become what you eat. You do not become broccoli. Whatever the tiger eats becomes part of the tiger. If the tiger can't use it, it goes as the way of the great septic tank. Whatever you eat becomes part of you. You do not become part of it. That is so simple that that should scare you to start with. Up into the realms that would seem to be of more psychological, if not spiritual significance. That you are what you eat, all right? Long before you met me, are any of you going to tell me that you did not read several, if not hundreds, of great mystical and spiritual books? I'm talking about books that other people said changed the world, books at the time that you read it, you went, I'm beginning to have a mystic attack, I'm hyperventilating, this is going to lead to something great. Sure you did. Did it? Nope. You can barely remember what it was. If somebody really jogs your memory, you might say, yeah, I know I read that book. I know I did. In fact, it was one of my favorites for a long time. You did not become what you ate. Contrary, as far as opposite exist, which of course they do in the binary world, or we couldn't talk here because your eardrums would not give up opposition to the sound waves coming out of my mouth. And so we're left right now with a confrontation. Well, you think it is. And the molecules say it is. I have yet to decide. You are not what you eat, because if you were, and the truth could be put down, the secrets you wanted, the secrets you thought you'd found in a book, when you ate them, they would have become part of you. If you are what you eat, you would not have had the crown back in college for exams. When you're covering 3 chapters this quarter, you read the damn 3 chapters. Well, you sit down, you take the Walkman, the headphones off your head, and you sit down and you read it. Assuming that you understand the King's English, and they're using fairly well-known verbs and adjectives and nouns. If not, you have a dictionary appropriate to that course. You read it through, and each and every sentence makes some sense, and that's it, right? Or you wonder about why there seems to be injustice in the world, and you pick up an Old Testament, you pick up the Koran, you go seek out a rabbi or a minister, and he quotes it and he says, it's because we do not treat our fellow man as we do ourselves. Let's assume that that is one of the great cosmic truths. I'm not saying it is, let's assume it is. You would go, oh my God. You would eat it and it would become part of you, and you'd just be a walking saint. Perhaps a sailing saint for all I know. But it's not true. On the contrary, what you eat becomes you. What you eat is only what you already wired up in your whole nervous system. And this, the nervous system that's wired up and seems to be a you, a Frank, a Joe, a Mary, or a Sue, and whatever goes in there has to fit that, if you want to call it this psychological digestive system. And it will fit. At line level, you'll take it in and you chew it up, and that which does not fit becomes that which rhymes with fit. It does not, but it all becomes part of you. If it does not fit into Joe or Frank or Mary or Sue, forget it. It should be as obvious as what? It should be as obvious as the conservative decor of the Pope's bedroom. If it were true that we are what we eat, then all psychological theories would be absolutely true. That what I went through through in the beginning of this evening with my examples of the two classes that seem to be those seeking approval and those seeking to avoid disapproval, and then my pseudo, my quasi, my ersatz description of how this came about through this particular child's childhood would be correct. That yes, my father did continually say to me, boy, are you a sissy. Drop your pants, let me see which sex you are again. I can't remember. You're no child of mine. Then all of that would be absolutely true. We would all be in a fine kettle of oysters, because then it would be true and there would be no way out. Except people continue to smell, even though it's sort of an accepted reality now, the world of the subconscious and etc. Still, everybody smells something fishy. They don't go around necessarily thinking about it all the time, but when you hear these psychological descriptions, at least about other people, ordinary people are still susceptible to immediately hear a disclaimer, a coda to the psychological theory or description of somebody saying, hey, that's a bunch of bunk. Everybody almost is primed to go, yeah. The only exception they find is when you need your own way out. That I bet those kind of psychological things are true. There is something subconscious that will make me act like this because I don't want to, and I don't like it, and so something's making me do it, and I don't believe in demons anymore. So it's got to be subconscious things. If we are what we eat, then everything that happened to you would be what brought you right here. That when I say that given the two choices, this old conflict apparently between heredity and the environment, and I keep telling you that given those two choices, and I keep telling you that for a very particular reason, that I'm getting closer to the fence tonight, if you can hear it, that given those two choices, there is no such thing as the environment. It just simply does not exist. What seems to be the environment is what you perceive as being everybody else's heredity. That's why they're acting the way they do. And you say, well, that's my environment, the way people treat me. And of course, you are their environment. But if we are what we eat, then I'd be wrong. I'd like to see that. Well, never mind. Then, what man believes, right here, what man believes at line level consciousness would be true. Can you see it? And yet it's not, because we are not what we eat. Let me refer you back to myself. A year or more ago, I brought this up under another context. I was trying to get you to look down another line for a different reason, apparently. But how about in movies or in real life? There'll be some heinous crime, some small gang of teenagers in some urban area engage in some despicable act. And then apparently some apologist, some sociologist, some psychologist, some bleeding heart liberal says, well, my God, look at their environment. If you went back and saw it, they all came from fatherless households. They're all below the poverty line. We'd have more compassion. They don't need to be in prison or be punished. And then, at least in movies, a lot of times, somebody else will say, wait a minute, that sounds fine. Of course, now we're talking about, I guess, some bleeding liberal conservative. They'll say, that's fine, but look at this same environment. They came out of these tenements here, this housing project, and we've gone in and we counted heads. And there are 2,375 other teenagers in there who have never been in trouble. How do you explain that, Bunky? Of course, that's not the sort of thing that humanity, that is ordinary consciousness, can dwell on. Because something is fishy, right? It sounds all right to most people nowadays, in our time zone, that, hey, the environment. It doesn't have to be just this classic urban poverty. It can be that you find this guy kills his family. Then you find out his father never gave him any approval. He went out for track and he came home with a little thing, little trophy, and his father said, that trophy, and he whipped out a tape, and he said, it's only 8 inches high. He said, I don't even see a trophy, and he broke it. Then he went out for football, and he came home, and he said, Pop, I got a letter. And his father said, a letter? When I was your age, I had 3 letters. Plus, I was vice president of the college. So, he ends up, at the age of 17, he shoots his father. Hey, Who can be that surprised, right? Except everybody knows somebody, maybe you even, that their father treated them the same way, or some guy you knew in school, his father treated him the same way, and he didn't kill his father. Something's fishy, right? If we were what we eat, then if one thing was true, if one guy killed his father because he never got approval, then every father that never gave his son approval would get killed, right? It would be a fact. Any situation that you found that the apparent environment gave a satisfactory explanation of why, after these environmental pressures happened to this person, they did what they did, this chain of so-called cause and effect, then every other situation you found, which you would find pneumo, every other situation, the same thing would occur, and it does not, and nobody can explain why. Of course, I guess even today in psychological arenas, they still throw it into the kind of attempted explanation that we don't fully understand the kind of the ratio within the dynamics of genetics and environmental forces, and that's why some people can be in a certain environmental situation and act one way, and somebody else be in almost the identical one and act another way. That we just don't understand that there's a kind of balance working there. Oh, of course there is, but they don't see what the balance is. If we were what we eat, then everything that happened to you would be manifesting itself in some way, that there would be common denominators in the behavior, in the beliefs, and the thoughts of everybody on this planet. Whereas it's not. As that great comedian in the Old Testament came out with that story about the Tower of Babel. There is, from any ordinary viewpoint, from line level consciousness, all the way from our religious leaders to our so-called psychological experts, there is no common explanation for human behavior. And so they keep wrestling that there is some kind of balance between at least some. Right now, all of you, I assume, know, heredity right now has the weightier following. Is that we all, at line level consciousness, from experts down to the public nowadays, in this time zone of the world, that the environmental causes are surely the predominant ones. They just are. That's an accepted fact. For a while, some people believe, some psychologists and experts believe that was really all of it. But we're about to come to our senses. I think we went a little overboard, and now we're coming back, as witnessed by some examples I just brought up, that it's not all environmental influences all the time. There's still some little room of some kind of genetic influences. We don't have it nailed down yet. If we were what we eat, we would have it nailed down. If we were what we eat, it would be environmental. Everything would be as obvious as could be. Everything would be obviously true as man says it is. That every theory you've ever heard about human behavior, every notion you've ever heard, whether it seemed to be mortally inspired or attributed to the gods, about why a man is like he is, everyone you ever heard would be on the money if we were what we eat. But given the nature of the binary world, the apparent binary world in which all of you live, it is just the opposite, and no one can see it when it's just as plain as can be. That you are an energy intake machine, a transformer, and then an output machine. When I used to talk about the tiger, whatever the tiger eats, it doesn't matter. It becomes part of the tiger. Whatever comes into you, if you're Frank or Mary, it becomes part of Frank or Mary. It has to fit into your so-called, or as I was calling it, psychological digestive system. If it does not, it's not seen, it's not heard, it's not thought about. It's as though it didn't happen. It's as though you didn't swallow it. It's as though you ate something that had absolutely no taste, no nutritional value. It passed through you, and as far as every little cell in your body knew, if somebody said, you just ate so-and-so, if you could round up all the little cells and say, are you aware of it? They'd all go, no. I must have been busy. Something happened. It was invisible food. Other than that, everything else, it does not take in food X, food Y, food Z, and it become part of them. Or they do not become it. It becomes part of them, the part that can be used, the part that fits into the way they are already wired up, the parts that fit into the kind of energy that they can take in, rearrange, either amplify, augment, diminish, alter in some manner, and then pass on. That we are all, no matter who you are, no matter what you think you know, we are all part of life's circulatory system. And the little cells do not become what they eat in life's body. And at the human level, you are not what you eat. What you eat are you. If any of you begin to get a glimpse of this, it is so astoundingly obvious, as you'll note that there has not been a great deal. I'll mention to you people on the tape, we have not had people falling out on the floor here, having mystical visions. There are a whole bunch of little faces with smiles and going, but you notice it is not claps of thunder. Those of you that get a kind of handle on this shortly are going to see that every explanation from whatever range, however you want to describe the extremes, from spiritual to mundane, from mystical to psychological, that everything in there is based upon, without them knowing, the notion that we are what we eat. Always has been, for a very particular purpose. The obvious one, if I just point out to you again, this is not the truth, but I always say this to give you a way out for the time being, a place to put your foot. The obvious being that it keeps people going, that it doesn't, otherwise you get the terminal blues and we'd all give up and you wouldn't pass along the food and the blood and the oxygen in life's body. But you would see that all of these theories are based upon, all these ideas, all these great eternal, cosmic, religious, supernatural truths are based upon the assumption that we are what we eat, when it's not true. And once you see it again, a whole lot of things that seem confusing are not all that confusing, to say the very least. That nobody becomes what they eat. The thing is that people at ordinary level have absolutely no input, no control, no influence over what they eat. That is, all the way from food, if you're looking at it as being these kind of verbal extremes, all the way from physical food to non-physical theories, feelings, human emotions, ideas. Those of you who have been around here for some length of time, those of you correctly drawn to this other than dilettantes and ne'er-do-wells and smart alecks and other people that I might recognize were I to come to your city and see you in person, the rest of you, after a short length of time, should see, without getting the blues, without being negative and pessimistic, that you have almost, not you look back, just for moments, that you can find almost nowhere that you can really say, well, I had some choice. I can remember the time that I sat down, I believe, it was long about 11 or 12 at least, I began to write down the foods that I was going to like from then on. Maybe you did it at 5. I don't know, you might have been precocious. Of course, you could have been an Albanian fellow, I know, but you write it down. Here's the foods I like, and let's see, I believe I like people who are not too aggressive. Yes, I will. Anyone who has the slightest idea of all of my diagrams about what this kind of activity has always been about, you have some very distinct notion that none of that took place. Of course, ordinary people then would say, you're right, because almost everything that's happened to motivate you and I happened on a subconscious level, through the environment, through what happened to us. And that's where we picked up all of these unrecognized motivations that make us have taste in clothes, and the way we comb our hair, and the kinds of people we're attracted to. To have some real suspicion that something is funny, that there is almost no area in which there is benefit to speak about how I developed my taste and what I eat, all the way from food to music to art to religious ideas to social ideas, everything. All of the energy, all of the information, but not discounting food, not discounting quite mundane things of your taste in clothes. that I had, as far as I can see, no effect, no input. I was not involved with any decision making, if there was any, about how I develop my taste and what I intake. Once you get that very clearly in sight, at least, say, 3 or 4 times a week, then you can get a handle on what I am talking about tonight, that every notion that seems to motivate the world of civilized, thinking man is based upon the notion that we are what we eat, when, as far as opposites exist, the opposite is true, because what I eat is the same thing over and over and over. I had no input as to how I developed this taste. It just happened, which is my description of you. We just wired up genetically. My taste and everything that I take in was already wired up in me. Therefore, the idea that I am what I eat, at the very least, would be redundant. At the very least. Then into the world of that which should be of some significance, since the redundant is not of any significance, then the best you can say for it is it's ridiculous, which would be synonymous with useless, which would be synonymous with a beautiful acme that life has placed upon us. That it has got to be undeniably true that we are what we eat, because if we are, it explains everything at that moment. Aha, yeah, oh, okay, yeah, I got you. Then you go on about your business until the next time it comes up, and then it's always, well, that's something you ate. It's something that happened to you from the environment. Somebody that had the experiences you had, the kinds of terrible things, the kind of unusual things that happened to you, it's no wonder that you are like you are. You ate it. You didn't ask for it. It was almost force-fed, to at least be allegorical for a second. So it's no wonder that you are like you are. But if that was ultimately satisfying, what in the world are you doing here? You are not what you eat. What you eat are you. And what can you change? What can you affect once you begin to understand it? There are two areas there. What can be affected?